June 20th. Today, Trump's war in Iran has met none of his objectives, but he wants to walk away, giving Iran a sweet deal that's far from the unconditional surrender he once demanded. Even many Republicans are appalled.
Then Trump's DOJ tells a federal judge, no, we will not put it in writing that Trump's $1.776 billion compensation fund is dead. That's amid reports the administration is looking for other ways to funnel your taxpayer dollars to January 6th defendants and other Trump cronies.
And drain the swamp, the one Trump paid $14 million to paint, which is now peeling and green with algae, as Trump's D.C. beautification effort just gets uglier. Grab your coffee, settle in, and welcome to the weekend.
Welcome to the weekend. I'm Jonathan Capehart, along with Jackie Alemany and Eugene Daniels. We begin this hour with a roadblock to a permanent peace deal with Iran. This morning, Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon killed at least 5 people, according to Lebanese state media, just hours after a ceasefire took effect between Israel and Hezbollah. It comes a day after that conflict delayed an expected first day of talks to reach a final peace deal between the United States and Iran. Vice President J.D. Vance delayed traveling to Switzerland yesterday for the start of those talks. Meanwhile, back at home, President Trump faces increasing blowback on the disastrous deal he signed from some members of his own party. The Memorandum of Understanding addresses issues related to the war of choice President Trump started, like reopening the Strait of Hormuz. But unlike President Obama's 2015 deal with Iran, President Trump's interim agreement only outlines a general path toward restricting Iran's nuclear activities, leaving most issues for future talks. Chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Mississippi Republican Roger Wicker, blasted the deal, saying it negotiates away the victories of the president's war. I don't know, Senator Wicker, what those victories are, but the fact that Republican senators are criticizing this is very interesting. But the other thing people have to remember, this is a memorandum of understanding. This is not a deal per se, and it's just...
No, it's not that it's not a deal per se. It's not a deal at all.
It's not a deal at all.
Correct.
But this MOU is about getting to the table, and it's 60 days.
Yeah.
Wendy Sherman, when she was Undersecretary of State, basically moved to Switzerland because the negotiations were that intense and ongoing. And the idea that the Trump administration thinks that it can resolve all the problems in 60 days is just speaks to my mind, how unserious these folks are.
I'm not sure that the Trump administration thought that this deal would solve all the problems, but I think that they could communicate or at least pretend that this deal solved all the problems from a messaging perspective, which was the objective, because I really don't see how we are in a different place today than we were last weekend when we were asking the exact same questions to each other and to our guests about this, other than the fact that there have been these sort of ceremonial, again, made for television, made for headlines, at least for certain reporters, to communicate to the American electorate ahead of the November midterms that everything's fine, gas prices are back, the strait's open, this is in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, and that's just, it's categorically untrue that it is in the rearview mirror. We all know that. You watching at home know that. And the White House is trying to convince folks that that is the end of, that's moving on. I will say these GOP senators who are, now very outspoken about it is very interesting, because there were lots of opportunities for them to sign on to all of these different types of bills that Democrats were putting forward, one that actually passed. But some of the names that we're seeing now that have big problems with it were not folks that signed on to those bills. And I think it is one thing to crow about something, to whine about something after the fact, after you see this 3 pages of a memorandum of understanding. It's a completely other thing to actually utilize your constitutional duty and say you cannot go to war and dictate things without the consent of the Senate and the House.
Well, you know why they didn't speak up and exercise their constitutional right as
a YOLO caucus.
Article 1, branch of government. It's because they are the staffing arm of the executive. Well, joining us now, MSNOW contributor Inzamam Rashid in Dubai. Inzamam, the big question here is, one, what are you hearing there in the region? And two, the impact of the ongoing back and forth between Israel and Lebanon. How might that derail what the Trump administration is hoping will happen in terms of the memorandum of understanding?
Well, let's start with that point, guys, because it's crucial. Remember, point one of the Memorandum of Understanding is that fighting ends, including Lebanon. And so on day one, when peace talks were supposed to take place yesterday, these negotiations and all the technical issues in that agreement, we failed at the first hurdle as a result of those Israeli strikes inside of Lebanon. Israel saying that they were targeting Hezbollah officials and the Lebanese health ministry saying that innocent civilians were killed as a result of those strikes. So now we're in a situation where the Iranians are angry as a result of those Israeli strikes inside of Lebanon. It's been their red line all along. They said that in order to get the MOU signed, the fighting had to end inside of Lebanon. It did for a few days. We got the MOU signed. There was this big fanfare from President Trump of signing it inside the Palace of Versailles. And then now we essentially go back to square one because of the fighting. Now, my sources inside Iran have told me that they are incredibly angered. Yesterday, one senior official who is part of the talks, he said to me that it's difficult to see how talks can get underway around the MOU whilst Israeli hostilities continue in Lebanon. He also added that the death toll overnight, one night ago, whereas around 18 people reportedly had been killed, he said that that was unacceptable. Now we're in a situation where the Iranians seem like they don't want to travel to Switzerland to get these talks underway. Yes, we know that potentially Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are on the way to Switzerland. We know that yesterday the Qataris were there. We know the Pakistanis have been there, but the Iranians haven't gone. And it's my understanding now, guys, as well, that the Pakistani interior minister has essentially been dispatched to Tehran to try and persuade the Iranians to get on a flight, get over to Switzerland and start having these talks, to start these negotiations, because now the clock is ticking. And it's a big question whether we can have all these huge technical discussions around Iran's nuclear program, Iran releasing frozen assets, what the Strait of Hormuz looks like in the future within just 60 days. Remember, it took almost 2 months to get this MOU signed, just this agreement signed. And now we've got to get all these discussions within the next 2 months. And I think ultimately, given what's happening inside Lebanon, given the impact it's had on the Iranians, it's not looking all that positive. I have to be honest.
MSNOW's Inzamam Rashid in Dubai all over this for us, as always. Thank you so much for coming to the weekend. We're joined now by Vivian Salama, staff writer at The Atlantic, and John Brennan, former CIA director and MSNOW senior national security intelligence analyst. Thank you both. Guys, we're here again, having a very similar conversation. I want to pull up an element that shows the difference between the JCPOA, or the similarities between the JCPOA and this 3 pages of a memorandum of understanding. The JCPOA 2015, you have Iran commits to no nuclear weapons and restrictions. The MOU, Iran commits to no nuclear weapons, 60-day talks for specifics on enrichment and accepts monitoring. Sanctions phased in after verification for the JCPOA. Immediate waivers for oil exports, negotiated final sanctions for the Iran deal that Trump has. No funding for economic development in the JCPOA. $300 billion for economic development with regional partners in the Trump-Iran deal. The JCPOA was negotiated with China, France, Germany, Russia, UK, and the EU. This current agreement is a U.S.-Iran bilateral agreement. The pages, which I think is very important because more pages mean more negotiations happen and went back and forth. 159 for the JCPOA, 14 paragraphs and 3 pages for this. John Brennan, this feels to a lot of people as, okay, it's going to be a jumping off point. But all of the things that they are still fighting about, nothing has changed about those things. What is the big difference between what we have right now and the JCPOA?
That the JCPOA was able to be implemented according to its terms. And it allowed the United States and the other countries around the world that signed on to this to see that the Iranians were not going to be able to move forward with any type of nuclear weapons program. And the plutonium reactor was taken down. Their heavy water was all sent out of the country. The centrifuges were either destroyed or put into storage. There was so much that was done, and this was 10 years ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we wouldn't have had to have dealt with the last 10 years of turmoil and conflict and war and violence if the JCPOA was allowed to continue. And when Donald Trump tore it up, he had no idea what was in there. And he continued to condemn it over the years. But as you said, this MOU, it calls for a lot more money and resources going to Iran. And it's still uncertain whether or not they're going to be able to implement any of the nuclear aspects of this deal. And also there's the one difference, the big difference, which the JCPOA didn't have the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This war resulted in that, and tremendous disruption in the world's energy markets, economy, and so on. So, Donald Trump, I think, has recognized now that he can't get what he wanted, the total unconditional surrender of Iran. So he's had to, settle for something that the Iranians now, I think, believe is really very much in their interest.
I will point out paragraph 8 of this memorandum of understanding says the Islamic Republic of Iran reaffirms that it shall not procure or develop nuclear weapons. Reaffirms because they had already said that they were going to do that under the JCPOA. And also Donald Trump said that's the most important aspect of this, and it is paragraph 8. But I leave that on the table.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Well, yesterday, when I was reading myriad clips on this, I was making a list of all of the entities that are unhappy with this. Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, basically all the Persian Gulf countries. I didn't see that much criticism from the Saudis, who I think are just happy that no bombing has resumed. But Vivian,
they have their issues with it. They might not be as vocal, but they definitely have their issues.
I mean, this is a topic that we have talked about ad nauseum for months, and with you as well, about how whatever deal was going to be bilaterally negotiated was going to be upsetting to a lot of the neighbors in the region because of concerns that they've had from the get-go that the president was going to feel a lot of political pressure to come to a bad deal. Actually, our colleague David Rohde, I should read some of his reporting, too, that encapsulates this. Officials in Persian Gulf countries criticized the deal as well, with a senior official from the UAE describing the mood as complete disappointment. Can you talk about why that is and why now the president is just saying that at the end of the day, now after saying this was a huge issue, that the ballistic missile aspect of this no longer matters?
Let's take viewers back to February, where remember February?
Sort of.
Yeah, not really. But I do remember that the president was trying to rally Gulf allies to support him in this war. And not only did they say they did not want to take part in the war, they didn't want the U.S. to use the bases that they host in their countries, U.S. bases, as launching points for this. They even didn't want to give flyover rights for military planes in this war because they did not want to see themselves, they didn't want to be complicit. They felt like the situation was stable. It wasn't ideal, but it was stable. No one was launching bombs at each other, and they were okay with that. And they knew that immediately, if they launched war, the Strait would be weaponized, and their countries would be the first line of attack. And they were. They have been fending off bombs since the end of February because of this, and they miraculously, the impact has been relatively limited because they have some nice weapons from the U.S. especially, but it's still had an enormous impact on their economies. These are all predominantly hydrocarbon reliant, economies that we're talking about, and they haven't been able to get their chief export, their primary export, out of the Strait, and so the whole thing has been very unsettling. But the war was started, and they said, listen, now you started it, you have to finish this. And for them, finishing it was what? Either regime change or, some sort of final agreement to ensure that moving forward, things were going to go back to normal. And they don't have any of that. The Strait is still a big question mark. And there is no guarantee that after 60 days, we haven't even gotten to we are in the 60-day period technically right now, but we don't have any guarantees that we won't go back to fighting after 60 days. And so the Gulf countries are very unsettled that this is all just going to be very prolonged war.
Director Brennan, the one country we haven't talked about yet is Israel. They're not happy. And the Washington Post reported yesterday, and I filed this under the Water is Wet file. Headline, U.S. intelligence.
Not according to you. Yeah. We'll get into that later.
Director Brennan, U.S. intelligence warns Israel is likely to undermine Iran peace deal, officials say. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces pressure to continue a military campaign in Lebanon, current and former U.S. officials said. You're the former director of the CIA. Does that shock you at all?
No. And Netanyahu's great plans to bring the United States into this war in Iran several months ago clearly have backfired. And so now Netanyahu basically is screwed because Donald Trump has now put his real, commitment into making this deal work. And part of this deal is for Israeli forces to withdraw from Lebanon so that there would not be, any continued fighting in Lebanon. And so this is something that I think Netanyahu sees as a disaster. Not only does it tie his hands when it comes to Iran, because Iran's regime is still there. It's uncertain in terms of what's going to happen to its military, ballistic missiles, even its nuclear program. But also his hands are tied in Lebanon. And Netanyahu has made it his game plan to be able to try to crush and obliterate Hezbollah. He uses his very powerful military, security, and intelligence services, and he has not refused to basically try to negotiate and see whether or not there's some way to negotiate either with, in Lebanon or with the Palestinians. So again, this MOU is a disaster for Netanyahu.
And the problem is, as Eugene pointed out in the comparisons, this memorandum of understanding is just between the United States and Iran. Was it a mistake for Israel not to be at the table in order to guarantee, or try to guarantee, that the hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah stopped in order for the MOU to proceed?
Yeah, especially since it's number one on this little list, is that the war in Lebanon would stop, and Israel didn't sign anything.
Well, Trump didn't have really any cards when it came to Iran because he didn't want to return to fighting, and the Iranians knew that he was facing political pressure and economic pressures at home, so they knew that they had a very strong hand. And I think Trump realized that if he were to bring Israel into negotiations, it never would have resulted in anything close to this MOU, because again, Netanyahu is just adamantly opposed to having the Iranian regime, remain in power, much less become stronger as a result.
Can I just add, watch this space, because the fact that the Vice President of the United States from the White House podium went out and said on Thursday that Israel essentially needs to check itself and that the only friend Israel has right now in the world is Donald J. Trump is nothing short of extraordinary. That those words were said from the White House podium shows you the extent to which the relationship has suffered in part as a result of this war. And it seems, just based on some of the reporting and what we're hearing around the region, that could really continue if Netanyahu and President Trump don't find some common ground on this soon.
Vivian, that is such a good point that I would like to revisit during the next part of our conversation, especially the political aspect of this, for all of the people who thought that Trump was going to be so much better on Israel than Democrats or than Kamala Harris and a potential Harris administration. But Vivian Salama and John Brennan are sticking with us. We're going to have more on Trump's preliminary peace deal with Iran next, and another diplomatic tussle. No, not with Israel, but with one of Trump's other biggest allies in Europe. Rhymes with stallion. You're not going to believe this. You're watching The Weekend. We are back with Vivian Salama and former CIA Director John Brennan. I realized my tease was a little confusing. That was what we call a cliffhanger, my friends. But Italian Prime Minister, rhymes with stallion, Giorgia Meloni's. I want to talk about.
You gotta explain it, baby.
A little beef that's going on right now, with the president totally inventing a story that she begged him for a photo. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said she was astonished by the president's comments, which were, quote, completely made up, underscoring how much Trump's comments have angered Meloni's government. Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani pulled out of a visit to the U.S. next week. Director Brennan, during a time where Trump has just angered so many allies and alienated so many friends, what is the significance of this prime minister speaking out against him?
Well, I think they've known for quite some time that Donald Trump is a pathological liar. But now his lies are insulting people. So saying that the Prime Minister of Italy was basically begging for a photograph, he is insulting her. And I think increasingly these leaders are tiring of Donald Trump's attitude and actions, and so therefore they're willing to push back. They recognize also, as a result of this, MOU or whatever, that I think his favorability rating in many places is going down, not just here in the United States. His favorability rating supposedly in Israel is plummeting as a result of this, as well as in the Gulf states. So I do think that Donald Trump's shtick is getting old for a lot of these individuals, and Meloni, she is having, to make sure that her people understand that she's not going to take this, and she's going to swing back. So good on her, and I think more individuals should do that. I think, Macron has done it on occasion and others, but I think, Donald Trump has gotten away with it for so long, which is why he continues to do it. But again, I think the Prime Minister was absolutely right to push back against this.
And we should point out, because I read Corriere della Sera, the big Italian newspaper.
I said just like that.
And she has the Prime Minister has domestic political considerations here, not to downplay this fight, but to your point, Director Brennan, the president is extremely unpopular in Italy. And the president's fight with the Pope gave Prime Minister Meloni the pathway to put some daylight. And this whole, she begged me for a photo, he messed with the wrong person.
It's just weird, too. It's
sad and insecure.
It just doesn't mean anything. One thing, if it was about a disagreement they'd had, it's like my mom used to call these, and probably still does call these, unnecessary lies. We're like, no one asked you. All of a sudden, you're talking about this photo.
But also, we're not talking about pathological lying about something like this. Why is this what is triggering people, and not pathologically lying about the terms of a deal?
Yeah.
I wrote a story a few weeks ago for The Atlantic where I talked about how in the first term President Trump was seen by allies as being very unpredictable, and that was in part kind of a superpower of his because, it put especially some of our adversaries at bay. But this time around, they see him as unreliable. And it boils down to some pettiness as well that I keep hearing from allies where they say, we have real problems on our hands right now. This war is not over. That, the global economy is rattled by what has happened over the last few months. And we're fighting over a photo. They're just tired of it. Increasingly, I hear it from around the world where they're saying, this is not how we want to be spending our time. And if President Trump wants to, break relations or strain relations with stalwart allies because of something so petty, then the relationship is just going to have to shift. And they're all looking for alternatives in every way, economically, politically, because they just don't see the U.S. right now as a reliable partner.
What's the alternative? Because the United States, because of the decades-long relationships that the United States and presidents have built over administration, Democrat and Republican, there aren't a lot of options for folks because we're so intertwined in the world economy, the world infrastructure, like everything.
Well, the fear from some in Washington is that China is the alternative on the economic side of things. But there's obviously hesitation, especially in Europe, for that partnership to be enhanced as well because of a myriad of issues that will take too long to discuss now. But you also have the military self-sufficiency. We saw this in the aftermath of the Ukraine war, where Europeans said we cannot rely on the U.S. as much, and we have to be more self-sufficient and develop our defense industry base more to do that. And so it depends on the sector and the issue that we're talking about. But all in all, like the last few years, allies are trying to find alternatives to operate in sort of a less intertwined way with Washington.
Vivian Salama and Director Brennan are sticking with us to talk about some more controversial news that happened this week with the Trump loyalist who is now the acting director of national intelligence. What damage can Bill Pulte do after the president suggests he should investigate, quote, rigged elections? You're watching The Weekend. Donald Trump loyalist and top housing official Bill Pulte is now officially the acting director of national intelligence. Pulte has no background in intelligence or national security as is required by law, but he does have experience targeting Trump's perceived enemies, including leading mortgage fraud probes into Senator Adam Schiff, New York Attorney General Letitia James, and Fed official Lisa Cook. The president has suggested and at some points explicitly said that Pulte can now use his time as acting DNI to investigate what Trump falsely calls, quote, rigged elections. Unsurprisingly, Democrats aren't thrilled with the appointment, but some Republicans are frustrated as well. Earlier this week, Trump paused the nomination process for full-time DNI nominee Jay Clayton after the Senate attempted to fast-track the process to keep Pulte out of the job. He also set a new demand, saying he wouldn't authorize the approval of the reauthorization of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act unless the Save America Act goes along with it. Vivian Salama and former CIA Director John Brennan are back with us. There are so many things to unpack here, and I would like to give myself a pat on the shoulder because I said this last weekend that the top priority that Trump has left in the remaining months that he has the majority is getting the SAVE Act done. But I want to start with the fact that the person who is charged, at least in an acting capacity, with protecting the U.S. from our foreign adversaries during a time of war, his priority is to investigate, quote, rigged elections. Can you contextualize how extraordinary this is?
Well, we've talked about this for weeks, that Bill Pulte has no credentials whatsoever, no experience in intelligence, and he's being sent in there, I think, with two mandates. One, as you point out, to try to find something that is going to give some type of boost to Trump's claims that the 2020 election was rigged. And he can go through files, he can try to pull out some things, he can very selectively redact information and misrepresent the facts. The second mandate appears to be to slash and burn the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which was created in the aftermath of 9/11 so that somebody in an office would be able to orchestrate the activities of the 18 intelligence agencies.
Because they weren't speaking to each other, and that's one of the reasons people say we missed 9/11.
Yeah, and the Office of Director of National Intelligence, it has the National Intelligence Council that does the national intelligence estimates, has the National Counterterrorism Center, the National Counterproliferation Center. It has a lot of these functions. Can it be reformed? Can it be, can some people, move back to their home agencies? Of course. But he doesn't have any of the type of experience necessary in order to understand what to do. But again, looking for things on the election front, again, giving someone like Bill Pulte, who had no security clearances before, giving him access to these files, both, substantive files as well as personnel files, whatever else, it really is a recipe, I think, for disaster. And I know it's demoralized the people in the agencies.
Having seen some of those files yourself, are you worried?
I am not worried at all that the intelligence community, did something wrong, during the 2020. And the Director of National Intelligence has very limited responsibility when it comes to election interference. The office is required to put out an assessment about what type of foreign interference might, in fact, be seen in these elections. But when Tulsi Gabbard went down there, was it to Georgia, whatever, and part of a raid, and getting ballot boxes, that is so inconsistent with what the authorities are of the Director of National Intelligence. So who knows what Bill Pulte is going to do? They don't honor the guardrails that have been established either by law or by practice. So Bill Pulte, I think, is going to be Donald Trump's pit bull, and he always seems to want to try to satisfy Donald Trump and do whatever he wants.
To your point, Political reporting that he directed the ODNI staff late on Thursday to pull together a list of about 300 candidates to be fired from the National Counterterrorism Center in the coming weeks. I will also point out, and I feel like it is very important to do so, the law that created this position is very clear. It says the DNI shall have, not could have, maybe we think about they should have, shall have extensive national security expertise. That is the law. They are breaking the law. Again. Like, he doesn't have it, and Jay Clayton, frankly, doesn't have it either. So either way, they're breaking the law. You're not seeing even Republicans stand up and say anything, but whatever. But there is some criticism after Trump announced Pulte's appointment. This was this month from the Republicans. Let's just listen to this just a little bit.
Bill Pulte yesterday was...
I don't think he has a prayer being confirmed by the U.S. Senate.
Where do you land on Bill Pulte?
Well, I think it's a funny pick, to say the least.
He's not qualified for the long-term position. That's been clear on this. He has no national security background.
And yet, They didn't storm the gates of the White House, knocking on doors and telling the president this is not going to stand. They didn't do anything. They just let it go, like they let everything go, Vivian.
It's a pattern for sure that we see Republicans not really pushing back hard. I mean, this is actually pretty extraordinary considering how they have, in most cases, tried
the bar's
to
on the floor on criticism.
They avoid President Trump's criticism because they fear his wrath, and especially where we are in an election year, that is particularly front of mind for a lot of these people. But in this case, there has been a lot of concern about his experience and also about weaponizing the IC, which we have seen, in waves since this administration came in, and it's been a major concern not only here in the U.S. and even among President Trump's allies, but around the world, where countries that do intelligence sharing with us are now questioning sort of the legitimacy or the veracity of the information that they're getting from the United States based on the people who are steering the ship. It's a major concern, but also some of these firings that you're talking about now are picking up names of perceived enemies. This has been happening in waves since President Trump took office, and so it's unfortunately not something new.
Yeah. Director Brenner, real quickly in the less than the minute that we have left, the New York Times reported on Wednesday about concerns from former officials about the possibility about Pulte. And I want to read this. Former officials and lawmakers have said they are worried Mr. Pulte could declassify information that increases foreign propaganda, feeds false narratives about past or future elections, and exposes sources or methods of intelligence collection. Legitimate concern?
Absolutely. He has, again, no background, no experience. He will not understand the implications and the impact of some of the actions he's taken. Whether it's firing individuals, 300 individuals, that's a counterintelligence nightmare. You are going to fire people and, who have all these, clearances and secrets and whatever else, and then also giving him the opportunity to go through the files and do whatever he wants with them and release. The impact on our collection capabilities, our impact on our allies and our partners around the globe. So I think there's real worry, not just in the U.S. intelligence community, but globally, all among our partners and allies about what a Bill Pulte could do in terms of the impact on our intelligence capabilities and our relationships around the world.
Well, we have to go, but the next time you're here, I'm going to ask you whether you think the allies even bother to share real information with the United States. But that's another question for another time. The former CIA Director John Brennan, Vivian Salama, as always, thank you both for coming to the weekend. Up next, the Obama Presidential Center is finally open to the public. I was there for the grand opening ceremony on Thursday. On Thursday, we'll discuss that and bring you new sound from MSNOW's exclusive interviews with Barack and Michelle Obama. You're watching The Weekend.